Well, good evening and welcome to Ratio Christi South Africa, and welcome to the second week of our online symposium. Great that you guys all of you can join us on YouTube. And if you're not able to catch the talks live, they will be up there for later viewing for those of you who want to share these videos around. Who is Ratio Christi? We are a student campus ministry. Began in the United States and is spread to many countries in the world. Here in South Africa, we have a pretty vibrant Ratio Christi community with 5 chapters located at 5 of the major South African universities: Stellenbosch, University of Pretoria, Northwest University, Rhodes, and UKZN as well. We exist to serve Christian students and professors on campuses by helping them better understand the reasons for the Christian faith, be those historical, philosophical, scientific, or theological reasons for understanding Christianity. We do that to strengthen the faith of Christians in the academy, but also to improve the conversations with those who don't share the Christian worldview in order to deal with objections and questions leveled against the Christian faith, and also to have an opportunity to share the gospel and introduce people who don't know Jesus to Jesus and his amazing work of salvation. So that's who we are. We do have a local South African website. Do check that out at ratiochristi.co.za, where we've got a lot of free articles and books there that you can go and avail yourself of. And also, in addition to that, we have our Ratio Christi South Africa YouTube channel, where we have a growing library of interviews and talks with scholars from around the world and scholars from Africa on all kinds of topics. And so please do check those out. We do ask that you would please recommend us, especially to young people, high school students and university students and professors. But of course, our material is available to everybody. Everybody's got questions nowadays, so you can all dive in and learn. And also, please do pray for us as an organization. And if you feel led to do so, consider supporting us as well as we try and build Ratio Christi, not only here in South Africa, but in the rest of the African countries on the African continent. My name is Simon Brace. I am the National Director for Ratio Christi South Africa, and I also lead the chapter here at Northwest University with my wife, Nell Brace. This evening, it's a privilege for me to introduce you to our speaker, who comes to us from the East Coast of the US, the state of Georgia. Our speaker this evening is Nora Hale. Nora, good evening and welcome to Ratio Christi South Africa.
Good evening. Hope y'all are having a nice day.
Yes, and Nora, it's difficult for me to say how much I am indebted to Nora and her husband, Duke. And they are really like my American parents. And so I call her mum and call Duke dad. I basically, when I was in the US, they took me under their wing and took care of me, and I was mentored and discipled by them, and they're just terrific people. And Nora and I worked at the seminary together for many years, and in some sense, a few years ago, Nora said something very prophetic, because Nora said to me that a lot of the apologetic issues that I thought were primary were going to be brushed aside, and that the issues of the future were going to be dealing with the issues of gender apologetics. I kind of snuffed and grumbled about that affair. It turns out that Prophet Nora ended up being correct, that the gender issue is at the center of discussions and public discourse, not just in America, but in many countries now all over the world. And so Nora has spent a significant part of her research and studying on this issue, dealing with gender and family and the issues of women and women in the church. And this evening, you're going to see that through the research that she's done. So we're looking forward to hearing from her on it. Before we dive into Nora's PowerPoint, let me just share some more information with you about who Nora is. Nora holds a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a Master's of Arts from Southern Evangelical Seminary. Upon graduating, Nora was named Dean of Women at SES, where she led instruction in women's ministries, the certificate program. Nora designed the program with a passion to help women understand their biblical role in the family and local church ministry. Nora has spoken on multiple university campuses and has also spoken for 10 years at the National Conference on Christian Apologetics, which is the longest running and largest apologetics conference on the globe. And as well as doing this, she's also spoken at a number of other international events on titles such as Why Gender Matters, Scriptural Authority and Reality, and Does Christianity Oppress Women? Nora, we are delighted to have you here this evening. I wish you were with us in person, but if you can take your share screen now and dive into your talk and present your material, and then at the end of it, we'll have some time of Q&A.
Okay. Well, thank you, Simon. Simon is my adopted son, so I'm very proud of the work he does in South Africa. And thank you for taking the moment to listen to me today. And I want to begin my talk by admitting that the idea that we even have to be concerned about the question, does gender matter, really grieves me, but it does not surprise me. As Simon said, this has been in the back of our minds probably for over a decade, that things have been happening that we really hoped would not happen. I look back over the past really 10 to 15 years, and I just see that this march towards irrationality has been moving at neck-breaking speed. What once was considered a novelty and even considered entertaining in American culture has not only become acceptable, but celebrated here in the United States. Those who don't concur are considered bigoted, even dangerous. Let's look at a couple things. You may recall these. I'm not sure how many of you would be aware of what happened in 2007, but a popular journalist by the name of Barbara Walters did a documentary on a young boy who decided he was going to become a female or a girl, and named himself Jazz, and was documented in 2007. Now he's a young adult who's gone through many transitional surgeries and many painful transitioning surgeries, and yet still purports that this is a good way to go. He's president, or Jazz is president of Trans Kids Purple Rainbow Foundation today. And then back in 2011, a famous young person by the name of Chastity Bono, daughter of Sonny and Cher Bono, came out as a transgender man on the show Dancing with the Stars. And of course, that was considered great entertainment in the United States, but pretty much, kind of bizarre and a novelty, not something people really very seriously. A couple in Canada about the same time made it known that their brand new baby Storm, in the red suit that you see there, had a brother who is now going to be the sister, and so this young brother is now becoming a girl. And at this time, this was 2011, so that the one whispering to the baby is also named Jazz. Although she says now, I like being different from everyone else. Again, you see a trend here. Jazz, Chaz, and Jazz is not that different. It sounds somewhat on the faddish side, but she says it's just awesome being trans. I'm really good at a lot of stuff, she says, like sports. So then we ask ourselves, have we lost our minds? At least I ask myself that. Do I have to deny reality and insist that I teach my children and grandchildren to deny their first thoughts and understanding of biological facts, unhinging reality and holding that one's reason and sensory perception should be disconnected? Well, we're living in a culture that promotes the idea that male and female were not created for each other, and even more insidiously teaching that one can have a female soul and a male body, as if the human being has a biological sex that doesn't really matter, but then matters so much that one would chemically alter or mutilate one's body to fit into a culture that defines who one is based on how one feels, and can change that definition from day to day. This is a denial of objective reality and the ability to understand and steward in the world, a denial of what it means to be human. And when we fast forward, we see that in 2021, this came out the other day from an organization that used to be really child-friendly, the Disney Corporation. Michael Haverlock wrote an article talking about how this particular company, Disney, is now promoting, normalizing, and encouraging transgenderism and other lifestyles among our youngest citizens. Miss Piggy here is saying it. He says, he quotes her, that Gonzo is talking to Miss Piggy. Gonzo is the character we see up on the screen there, but he's now decided to be Gonzarella. And Gonzarella does more than wear a dress. He instructs Miss Piggy that doing things a little different can be fun. So we see that this is just, being promoted all over our culture today, and really not even reported by our media because nobody wants to get canceled in the United States. So this former child-friendly corporation, Disney, as well as Lego, debuted their first transgender characters during Gay Pride Month, which was June, without mentioning the dangerous surgeries or anything about the dangers of this transgender movement. So we ask ourselves, is this just a fluke? Well, Dennis Prager said in an article that came out this past week, he says virtually the entire educational establishment from elementary school to graduate school in the United States is full of lies. Virtually no major institution in the United States is committed to the truth. The American Medical Association just announced that birth certificates should no longer list sex because we do not know the sex of a baby. Prager says sarcastically, we know the sex of every mammal on the planet, but not of human beings. And medical schools, and yes, even medical journals, are no longer referring to those who give birth as women, but as birthing persons, and breastfeeding as chest feeding. So again, we look at that, and we wonder how this happened, at least many of us do. So one must ask themselves in 2021, in the United States, how could the medical community, our elected representatives, big tech or media, big business, and big government buy to such an obvious denial of reality as the transgender movement? We might expect this of entertainment, what we call Hollywood in the United States, but why would there be such an all-inclusive buy into an ideology that denies the reality of science and reason? We hear the slogans in the United States, social justice and equity outcome, but once we see the truth behind these movements, we begin to understand the goals of all of this. Even if the outer coding purports to be affirming justice for all, and of course, who doesn't want justice for all in the United States and in South Africa? But the gender ideology that has turned provocative Hollywood entertainment into a life-altering fad is a major cog in the wheel rolling toward the destruction of the human family. By separating individuals, child or adult, from their family, the person becomes a government dependent. And believe me, that is the goal. The goal is to make government God. The family, on the other hand, is precisely where the child should be learning the connection between authority, obedience, and love, leading to human flourishing, not the state. Socialism, critical theory, neo-Marxism is in opposition to Christianity and reality, promoting the breakdown of marriage and thus the family. Much of this social control affects people unaware, but people in the United States are becoming more aware. Because of the lockdown of COVID, many parents are able to view what was being taught to their children in grades K through 12. And so we are, as a culture, becoming more outspoken about the problems with what's going on with this new education. It's funny that Simon and I are talking about this in a way that in 2018, I think it was Simon who first alerted me to the comprehensive sexuality curriculum that's being promoted in the United States and has been for a while. This curriculum is put on or pushed by the UN High Commission for Human Rights, Sexuality Information and Education Council of the US, UNICEF, the Kinsey Institute, and of course, International Planned Parenthood. It is presently in 170 countries and all 50 states to ensure, it says, reproductive health for children globally through 6,500 Planned Parenthood points internationally, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So again, we see the ideology also, of course, has a multi-billion-dollar industry behind it. One of the groups called the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development admits that what the purpose of these educational initiatives are is social evolution of cultural diversity. The new educational skills for our children are not about reading and writing and arithmetic, but are about the new sexuality norms and what should be considered acceptable, being taught, of course, by the government and not by families. And you see up here, it says the 15 harmful elements of comprehensive sexuality education. Even one of these elements should be reason enough to disqualify the program. And I'm going to show you the 15 elements at the end of this talk, but I want to say that many of us are aware that this is already common for us to see in our television programs and in our school system. So really to kind of go back to what's behind all of this and where this comes from, we're going to talk about different ideas, different ideologies, different worldviews. One of them beginning with the 20th and the 21st century, really majorly in the 20th century, with people who are atheist, materialism, and then relativism, which is popular today. We're going to talk about how these look in terms of what the world is really like. We're going to talk about what it means to be human, which is the most fundamental question that humans really might want to talk about, what it means to be human actually, and what does it mean to be male and female, and what does this convey about reality? Is marriage, one man and one woman, an outdated concept for the 21st century? Well, we'll start with materialism and see how it answers that question. If I was a materialist, which again was a prominent view among atheists and is today, they would hold that all that exists is matter, or that there's an eternal energy that produced matter. And basically their view, someone such as Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins would hold that basically we're bundles of DNA, at best a biochemical machine or a sensory machine. But I am not a materialist, and I'm sure most of you are not, because it doesn't match the reality of the world we live in every day, where people use reason, know something about truth, morality, beauty, goodness, liberty, equality, authority, and justice. Because we know these things as human beings, we can understand that real evil exists. However, a material determinist, such as Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, would hold that because we are just basically dancing to our DNA, we're not really morally culpable for our behavior. However, most of us don't agree with that. We do hold that we're morally culpable. That's why someone like this young man, James Holmes, who entered a movie theater and shot a bunch of people during the Batman premiere, is serving time in prison, because we know that human beings are morally culpable. And as John Lennox says in his book, Gunning for God, after all, if we're just a bundle of DNA, if DNA neither knows nor cares and we dance to its music, how is it that most of us do know and do care? C.S. Lewis says the Christian and the materialist hold different beliefs about the universe, and they both can't be right. The one who is wrong will be acting in a way that simply doesn't fit the real universe or reality. Consequently, with the best intentions in the world, the one who is wrong will be helping his fellow creatures to their destructions, to their destruction. Thomas Aquinas said, although the rest of nature blindly pursues its end, human beings are capable of rational thought, making human beings the highest sort of creatures in nature. The highest form of being in the universe must be one that is engaged in the highest form of rational thought. There is a natural universal law that is directed toward the end of human flourishing, and human beings are the ones who know this. Our well-being, living well, is what we are pursuing. However, fulfilling the end of being a human being is more than just avoiding pain and more than just pursuing pleasure, which is not equivalent to true happiness. Man alone is expected to govern over his conduct by reason, said Austin Fogarty. Man alone can act according to his reason, according to his nature, or against his nature. So we know there's a human choice going on. I think this quote by Austin Fogarty in his book, Right and Reason, actually sums up my talk in one quote. And this is where we're going today. Humans are naturally driven to strive toward our own perceived good end. If our conduct is inhumane, antisocial, or abusive to ourselves or others, our fellow human beings, even if we experience a temporary good, if it is destructive to others, it is not truly good. And we know this is where human law comes from. And human law, civil law, comes by human reason. Human law should promote virtue as a necessity for the common good of all and to live in community. We know that good is in accordance with reason and that evil is against reason. Living can be called unnatural because it violates the rules set by nature. And this is what is meant by natural law. Although we know that some people don't agree or don't subscribe to the idea that we're all made in the image of God, we as Christians do. We do all agree that humanity has been given the potential to reason. You're sitting there listening to me talk. You're asking yourself, hopefully, what she's saying making sense? Does it match the objective world? You're able to apprehend me. I'm able to apprehend information. We're able to talk about it because we have language. We have the will and the ability to use that to steward our world, to take care of our world. And of course, that's what Genesis 1:27 through 28 actually tells us, that we're made in God's image with this ability to understand and to rule and subdue and to multiply in creation. Romans 2 says even those pagan Gentiles who don't have the law have a law written on our hearts, a law that our conscience uses, bearing witness with our thoughts, with either thoughts that are accusing us or defending us, and that we as humans in Romans 1 are guilty of suppressing truth, that there is truth for us to suppress. And that truth actually tracks with the objective real world. Humans can make decisions to participate in unnatural behavior. I would say even those who don't hold to the idea that we are made in the image of God hold to those ideas that man alone produces in a unique way in the world. We know that humans are the only ones who make a decision to unite as male and female, husband and wife, to produce the next generation. That 24/7, while we're awake, we're making decisions as to how to steward our words, where we go, and what we are doing. Man has the ability and the accountability to make decisions that properly steward the resources of the planet. And we do exercise rule and dominion over other created beings and resources. Would you say that matches reality? Would you say what I'm saying is objectively true? I mean, we don't expect beavers to build skyscrapers. We don't expect dogs to know which side of the road to walk down. Would you agree with that? I think those are some of the simplest ideas even a child would understand. So how is it that we're made in God's image, and why is that important? Well, we do know that God, of course, is infinite. So everything about him is beyond anything that humans can truly and completely understand. But what we do know is that we are finite and he is infinite. We know that male and female have a certain boundary with which we are limited. We are limited within the boundary of where we live. We're limited in the boundary of who we were born to. We're limited in the boundary of what our chromosomal makeup is. So we as humans are limited, and God is limitless. But he's given us a conscious personality with a mind. He has the all-knowing mind that knew how to create the universe the way he wanted it to, so it would flourish. But we as human beings have a conscious personality. We're able to know what things are. We're able to know ourselves. We're able to know other people. We're able to comprehend and learn with our sensory perception from our world. And with this limited power that we have, our decisions stand. Our decisions stand because God made us accountable for the choices we make. And so God, unlike humanity, is everywhere. He's spirit, but we are present in this world presently to steward the creation. And looking at that, what that is called in, I guess, theological terms is hylomorphism. Our soul and body act as one being. We're not a soul and a body is the costume. That's not the way it works. Our soul and body act as one. The soul and body form one substance called the human being. Mankind has been given this type of body to work, body-soul work, so that we can do the job he's given us to do. Our nature as reasoning, potentially reasoning stewards. Humans can understand the world we live in because the world operates on a rational basis. In his book, Mind and Cosmos, the prominent atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel agrees that materialism alone, just our biology, will never be able to explain a reality that includes human beings. Why aren't we unconscious primates that go about our business? There's no obvious way that materialism or science could account for things like consciousness, rationality, or moral values. Yet these are realities that exist. So we have to admit, at least, that we know reality does exist. God saw all that he made, and behold, he said it was very good in Genesis 1:31. He observed in that quote that he made the world with good intentions, made to work for humanity, and he assesses it as good, useful, and workable. And the design works. The way God made it, the design works. So the steward, male and female, in Genesis 1 and 2, we have at least 6,500 known genetic differences between male and female. And we know that hormones and surgery cannot change this makeup, this genetic makeup. We can try to change the outer coating, but the inside's not going to change. And we're going to talk about some ideas that come from different biological journals of biology and of psychiatry, and different journals that I've used. They're listed all in my bibliography when we finish, but I adapted this idea from Stephen Clark, so you can look at this and then look at my bibliography for some more definition. But at the moment of conception, an organized pattern of DNA, an organized pattern of DNA is replicated into each cell of the human body. So we're going to first talk about the male and what happens when at 6 weeks of gestation, testosterone courses through the fetus's body, the male, the XY. And what happens is a this flood of testosterone bathes the muscles, bones, and tissues of the brain of the male child. This decreases the nerve connections. And so he has what is known as a differentiated personality structure, which is less connections in the corpus callosum. Now, again, we're going to talk about these things. I'm going to go over them fairly quickly. These are pretty much well-established ideas that have come through the study of biology. But what we know is that males tend to be more compartmentally focused because of this differentiated personality structure. They tend to be optimized for systems. They hold things out and examine them and say, what is this? They tend to be goal-oriented. In other words, I want to solve the problem. And any of you who are married women understand the problem with this situation is when you want to discuss something with your husband, what he really wants to do is tell you what to do about it. And so we experience the reality that men tend to be problem solvers. And that's a good thing. They tend to be goal-oriented in that way. They are optimized for systems. They tend to be aggressive because of testosterone, which is their primary hormone. They have Y chromosomes in their body, which produce M ganglion cells in the eye. That gives them a thicker cornea. And a thicker cornea is geared for motion and direction. So they tend to ask where something is. Male babies prefer the moving of a mobile over their head to the face of their mother. This is how male babies are unique from female babies. Also, if you look at history, if you look at anthropology, if you look at any of the sociology that tracks what's going on through the centuries, you see too that males are peer bonded, that they tend to look out to solve a problem, whether it's protection, exploration, or defense. They look out to conquer a goal. These things are good. These things have caused people to prosper, families to prosper, but there are good and bad on both sides of the male and female proclivities because we balance each other and we were made to balance each other. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the XX genetic makeup is like. And the genetic makeup of women, because we have an excess of X gene, there's more diversity in the female brain, more subconscious processing, and as many of these journals say, more of an interwoven heart and mind integrated personality structure, more of a people solver, optimized for empathy and personal need. And of course, women being the primary caregiver, being the only one of the two who can actually have a baby, is oriented towards nurturing. The primary hormone being released in oxytocin, which causes us to bond to our families. And that because we tend to be family bonded, we also are the ones who are drawn to the face through P ganglion cells in our eye with a thinner cornea that detects texture and color better, and it's drawn to the human face. Okay, these are ideas that have come out in many different ways through biological journals, but I'm going to show you an article that came out that actually was done by a researcher, Jody Pawlowski at the University of Rennes in France. We're going to talk about what actually happens to a mother's brain, and you're going to see how this tracks with what we were talking about before in the chart I showed with the male on one side and the female on the other. This article, Motherhood Brings the Most Dramatic Brain Changes of a Woman's Life. This came out in an article in the Boston Globe. It says, entering into motherhood is a major event for a female brain. She says, Jody Pawlowski, she focuses on what she and her colleagues call the neglected neurobiology of the maternal brain. She said, women experience a flood of hormones during pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding that primes the brain for dramatic changes in the region of thought to make up the maternal circuitry, making her protective and a motivated caregiver focused on her baby's survival and well-being. She says the researchers expect that these effects linger, shaping motherhoods in the years to come, in rearing their children, and even influence their relationship with their future grandchildren. So after childbirth, the volume of gray matter in the mother's brain changed dramatically, particularly in the region involving social processing and the ability to attribute emotions and mental state to other people. So let's look back. Does that look like it matches the integrated personality, the one optimized for caring for and nurturing the brand new baby who's coming into the world? I think it does. After childbirth, again, this gray matter has changed dramatically. They did a test on the fathers. The researchers scanned men's brains who became fathers during the same period and those who did not have a child, and found no comparable change in the gray matter volume. Okay, so again, we see that the woman has a certain proclivity that's being caused actually by a biological function. We hear that the researchers found that a surge of oxytocin in the mother's brain at childbirth triggers certain things that change. Women quite literally sync to their baby through a coordination of biology and behavior. Their brain synchronizes and their heart rate synchronizes, and they have the behavior of a matching response in gaze, touch, and vocalization with their babies. This intense connection teaches a baby from the very first days how to relate to another person, says Ruth Sims Mann, professor of developmental neuroscience at the Interdisciplinary Center in Israel. So when we connect, she says, with friends, romantic partners, and colleagues, even as we ourselves view members of sports teams, our nation, all of this is the repurposing of the basic machinery established in the connection between the mother and the baby. So let's look at what the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University said in cooperation with this information. Healthy development in the early years, or early childhood years, provide the building blocks for children for educational achievement, economic productivity, responsible citizenship, lifelong health, strong communities, and successful parenting of the next generation. So this early experience with the mother whose brain has gone through these changes, but also the baby is interacting with the mother and experiencing what is called brain circuitry, the development of brain circuitry, the serve and return interaction as the mother nurses her baby and cares for her baby. And of course, the female is best suited to relieve the toxic stress that babies endure as babies. Now, we understand how important this is because we see what happens when babies are placed in orphanages, and it takes them a long time to catch up. When they are adopted early on, first week or so, first month, they are again developing this connection with the female, even if she is not the natural mother, because we as women have hormonal changes that actually contribute to our being personal need oriented. Again, this is confirmed by someone you wouldn't expect to confirm it, Margaret Mead. If you're familiar with who Margaret Mead is, she's a 20th century anthropologist, probably the most well-known, who studied thousands of different cultures. And she says, here's the common chord. Among all these cultures, women show that they have an integrated personality. Women experience our bodies in a different way than men. We experience our bodies as a more firmly integrated part of our personality. Again, we talked about that connection between the left and the right side of the brain, that she says, Margaret Mead, that the differentiated personality of the male experiences itself more is a tool. Again, a tool in exploration, a tool in conquering, a tool in exploration. She said, in every known human society, the male need for achievement can be recognized. The recurrent problem of civilization is to define the male role in a satisfactory enough fashion so that the male may, in the course of his life, reach a solid sense of irreversible achievement. And this is, of course, from her book, Male and Female. She said, men have to learn to want to beget children, to cherish children, and to maintain a society in which children are provided for, as well as simply protected against enemies. So what does that have to do with us today? Well, this article came out in June and July in First Things magazine by Mary Harrington. She says, what feminists see as patriarchal controls are actually deeply fragile accomplishments benefiting both men and women. Thus, marriage civilizes male desire by connecting it to community and ensuring provision for women as they accomplish the unique task of childbearing. Sexual freedom, she says, brings alienation. Too little interdependence between male and female brings a collapse of social life. And Philip Longman from the Carnegie Institute corroborates this also. He says it takes a great deal of cultural capital to encourage young men to marry and fulfill the responsibility of husband and father. Present culture shows the good life does not include fatherhood with its commitments and responsibilities. He says, women will take marriage and parenthood with little significance, as many will avoid marriage and fatherhood altogether. He says fatherhood pushes men to be responsible husbands and fathers and holds men accountable for the care, protection, and discipline of the next generation. In such a society, irresponsibility in the task of parenthood is seen as a fundamental threat to society. So Dr. Clark sums it up by saying, a woman will bring her personal need orientation into the way she sets goals, and a man will bring his goal orientation into the way he cares for personal needs. This way of operating supplements weaknesses and strengths and seems to bring the greatest personal satisfaction to men and women, and that even when men and women are doing the same task, they gravitate toward these positions. So it's interesting that our scripture truly backs this up and matches reality. The Lord God said it was not good for the man to be alone, that he would make a companion for him who corresponds to the opposite of him. The words used in Genesis 2:18 through 20 are azer, kenegdo, azer, meaning helper, the indispensable companion, the woman, the indispensable companion, and kenegdo, literally meaning according to the opposite of him, who corresponds to him. Dr. Walt Larimore says in his brain, her brain, the woman is actually described as the rescuer of man, one who releases him from the bondage of aloneness, from inefficiency and ineffectiveness of living and ministering alone. And of course, we see this in 1 Corinthians 11 through 12, where the scripture talks about man is not independent of woman and woman is not independent of man. They are interdependent. And this interdependency is to make sure that humanity flourishes in the family, in the church, and in the community. So basically, Dr. Larimore sums it up. She is attuned to him and is gifted so that her strengths and proclivities match his weaknesses and her vision matches his blind spots, and vice versa. No wonder God said it is not good for man to be alone. That's a lot of information right there, and I get it. You're probably going, wow, that was fast, and it was fast for me. But again, all of the links are on my bibliography. I like what Ryan Anderson said in his book, When Harry Became Sally. Sex is bodily, biological reality. Sex is a bodily, biological reality. And gender is how we give social expression to that reality. Gender, properly understood, is a social manifestation of human nature, springing from biological realities, though shaped by rational and moral choices. Why? Because human beings are culpable, morally culpable for making rational decisions, reasoned decisions through our sensory perception and our ability to reason. Human beings are creatures of nature and of culture, but healthy culture does not attempt to erase our nature as male and female embodied beings. Instead, it promotes the integrity of persons, in part by cultivating manifestations of sex differences that correspond to biological fact. It supports gender expression that reveal and communicate the reality of our sexual nature. Charles Colson said that rather than being an arbitrary set of rules and restrictions that repress and distort our true nature, Christianity actually describes our true nature and shows us how to live according to it. We pay a high price for denying this reality. So we know that human beings flourish best with a primary caregiver who is an intimate nurturer and a secondary caregiver who protects and provides. This is nature's provision. So what happens when we go from pure materialism to postmodernism or relativism and try to live beyond our biology, beyond objective reality? Well, this is a denial of our sense perception, for one thing, but it necessarily claims a disconnection between the human soul and body. And the first person, well, one of the first person that did a lot of study in this is Dr. Paul McHugh, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about that gender ideology does harm children. And this came out from the American College of Pediatrics just recently, that basically no one is born with an awareness of themselves as male or female. This awareness develops over time, and like all developmental processes, may be derailed by a child's subjective perceptions, relationships, and adverse experience from infancy forward. People who identify as feeling like the opposite sex or somewhere in between do not compromise a third sex. They remain biological men or biological women. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics affirms that, yes, gender dysphoria is a real psychiatric confusion or delusion. Dr. Paul McHugh, who was the first to venture into sex reassignment surgery in the 60s and 70s at Johns Hopkins, he was the former psychiatrist in chief at Johns Hopkins, points out that changing one's sex is impossible, living beyond reality. Transgender people do not become the opposite sex. They become feminized men or masculinized women. He says in that lies their problematic future. It proves not easy or wise to live in counterfeit garb. Studies extending over 30 years in Sweden, where transgender people are highly supported by the culture, 10 to 15 years after surgical reassignment surgery, the suicide rate for those who have undergone sex reassignment surgery rose to 20 times that of their comparable peers, 41% in their lifetime. So again, transgenderism, the mind or feelings being the creator of reality, is the opposite extreme of materialism. When the thoughts do not correspond to truth or to reality and make false assumptions, we have a psychiatric disorder. The American Academy of Pediatrics concedes with its own guidelines that transition affirming protocol is based on low evidence. The only strong evidence is its potential health risk to children. So even though it's going along with the idea that one should transition, it's in 2016 saying this, but still going ahead with affirming transitioning protocol. So again, the Handbook on American Psychological Association says that 75 to 95% of children who are distressed by this dysphoria will outgrow it by late adulthood, 75 to 95%. Yet they continue to encourage puberty blockers, which cause a decreased bone mineralization, bone fractures, obesity, testicular cancer, and an unknown impact on psychological and cognitive development for children. And this is prescribed for children age 11 and 12, although I believe in the United States is being given to children younger than that now, in that we have at least 40 gender transitioning clinics in the United States. Cross-sex hormones, it says age 16 plus, causes cardiac disease, high blood pressure, blood clots, stroke, diabetes, and cancer, and sterilization. Now you think about that. Children this age making those kinds of decisions. Genital reassignment, which is 18 plus, but they are doing mastectomies at age 16 now, cause a functional mutilation of the body. So the scientific data shows those under 21 have less capacity to assess the risk. Can you imagine an 11-year-old making the decision to change the rest of their lives based on something that they have seen other people commend to them without even knowing the long-range effects because they're too young to give valid consent? This article came out by a guy named Russell Toomey recently. 1 in 2 biological girls who identify as boys tried to kill themselves this past year. That's 1 in 2 biological girls. 2 in 5 gender non-conforming adolescents tried to kill themselves, and 3 in 10 biological boys who identified as girls tried to kill themselves. So it doesn't seem like this is working very well. Another study that came out by Lisa Littman, who is a professor at Brown University, she documented the rapid onset of gender dysphoria, which takes place within a few days or weeks of children or young teens being exposed to peers who identify as transgender, or being exposed to transgender positive content online. And of course, she wanted to expose the faddish nature of this, just like anorexia nervosa became a huge fad in the United States. We understand there are kids who actually do suffer from gender dysphoria, but this has become a fad, especially among young middle school girls. But her article was quickly taken down. Again, Lisa Littman was canceled by our media. Whereas materialism says all that matters is your DNA and we dance to its music, relativism is a denial of the objective world and the boundaries set for what it means to be human. Instead, all that matters is what I think and feel. Transgenderism denies male and female biological reality, and homosexuality also denies the body's sexual design has an inbuilt purpose. Male and female sexual organs are unitive and procreative. As we talked about in Romans 1, humans can intervene by choice. We can suppress the truth. We have the freedom to choose what a thing could become. We have a choice to choose against what a thing could become if left to operate by its inbuilt design. But it would be unnatural for humans to cut off a limb, to gouge out an eye, or to remove a breast for anything other than disease. Yet this is explicitly what is seen in the transgender movement, where sexual organs with their inbuilt purposes are denied. The American Medical Association in 2016 said, in summary, born that way arguments on behalf of transgender rights are easily undermined on the basis of reason and scientific data. Supporter of transgender rights should avoid arguments that are logically flawed. Okay, So we know that to be human is to be gendered. And Glenn Staunton said in his book, Secure Daughters and Confident Sons, that the duty of rearing a child belongs to two parents. This is nature's provision for the human being. This is nature's provision for the human being. No society has ever figured out how to raise healthy boys and girls into thriving men and women without fathers and mothers in this essential task. We know from our scripture, this matches what our scripture tells us. We know that from the beginning, Jesus said in Matthew 19 that God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So what's so unique about one flesh? I think that what we do know about one flesh union is it holds the natural biological potential to produce humans with our natural obligations to each other. Man and woman choose to unite. We choose to be obligated to our children that we produce. Parents have that obligation, and adult children have obligation to their elderly parents. Of course, that's not just affirmed in Genesis 1 and 2, but by Jesus in the New Testament and also by Paul. Bob George puts it well. He says, first, unlike friendship, marriage unites people in all their basic dimensions. It involves a unity of minds and wills that unfolds in a sharing of resources. Of course, friends can do that, but he says, but marriage also includes bodily union. This is because your body is an essential part of you, not a vehicle driven by the real you, your mind, not a costume that you don. Your body is an essential part of you. One condition, says Jay Budashevsky, that makes the mutual gifts of selves possible is the two selves have something to give. They complement each other. This is because there is something missing in the man, which he finds in the woman, and something missing in the woman, which she finds in a man. And this incompleteness is a blessing because it is possible to give themselves to each other. Something is missing in the man, something is missing in the woman. There's a biological need for each other. Our reproductive function is the only bodily function that is not complete on its own and not self-contained. The male and the female form one single biological good, and during the lifetime of a marriage, union occurs repetitively, thousands of times to make spousal love concrete, even when conception does not occur. This unitive act of knowing each other face to face, some studies have shown that many studies have shown that this face-to-face human connection, which is what happens between male and female, is ultimately the key to our happiness, well-being, and longevity. That we are people who have a male-female face-to-face desire to know each other, and that the other creatures don't operate the same way we do. We know that even in Genesis 1, when the scripture talks about male and female, it doesn't speak of male and female, although we know the animals are male and female. When it speaks of male and female, it's speaking about human beings who know what male and female means, and those words for male and female actually describe the physical body of the male and female. By nature, biology, only men and women are able to generate life through a unitive reproduction. We are created in the community. We create a community, the human family, and that family is the foundation of our communities. We know that when God created male and female, he fashioned them in two patterns. The first pattern is our, as Barbara Mauser says, the model that we see in Genesis 1:27. The first model explains our humanity, God's image, which we individually possess as reasoning men and reasoning women. And the second model explains our sexuality, with the male taking Christ's part and the female taking the part of the church. Both of these are basic to human design. The father and mother are both needed to raise a child because the male is better suited for protection, the female for nurturance. Both are needed to teach the child, because the child needs a model of his own self, a model of the opposite sex, and that they are jointly irreplaceable. Jennifer Roebuck Morris said in her book Love and Economics, the greatest human rights violation for a child, other than taking the child's life through abortion, is that a child would not have his mother and father. Well, we know the gospel teaches this, of course, in Ephesians 5. We see the gospel teaching this union between male and female as God's provision for the family. But, knowing this, that the gospel really doesn't appeal to our culture, we also know that the gospel should be appealing to us who call ourselves Christians. But why should it appeal to those who are not Christians? Because marriage protects all people. Marriage laws ensures the well-being of men and women and children by encouraging men and women to commit to each other and take responsibility for their own sexual behavior. Every society has found its way to the establishment of marriage. But because of our liberal divorce laws that came about in the 1970s, marriage is no longer valued, and many people don't marry at all, in fact, and don't take responsibility for their own children. In 2021, nearly 19 million American children were living in single families. The studies show that they are 80% more likely to experience poverty, prison, sexual abuse, or physical abuse. We know that psychiatric disease is the biggest cause of human disability in the world. These findings are important because exposure to family adversity in childhood and adolescence, birth through 11, poses the biggest risk for later psychiatric disease. And when we dismantle the family, we also see that children and teenagers imitate adults. Our Centers of Disease Control now shows that teenagers, at least half of the CDC of the sexually transmitted diseases in the United States, are happening with children between the ages of 15 to 24 years old. So at a cost of $16 billion a year. Why would anyone be surprised when we take away the foundational structures that have allowed for human flourishing? Bad things will happen. An increased suicide rate, drug use, dropout, teenage pregnancy, and mental disorders. So why would we promote same-sex marriage when, according to Lisa Mundy and many other studies, lesbian partnerships break up at 77% that of gay male relationships, that break up at 2 times the percent of heterosexual couples? And there's reasons for that. I wish we had time to go into that. But I think that one statistic, 82% of gay men admit to being non-monogamous. That's according to Lisa Mundy in the Atlantic article. And that women tend to be too relationally intense to endure marriage to each other. Society can be said to exist only into the extent that spousal love remains intact. Except our Supreme Court doesn't seem to agree with that. Humans can choose to do the unnatural. They can choose to do things that are unhealthy for their children. And our Supreme Court went along with that. The United States Supreme Court, the American College of Pediatrics came out with this statement the day this happened and said, this is a tragic day for America's children. They have just undermined the single greatest pro-child institution in the history of mankind, the natural family. And it says the college itself maintains that a significant body of research has demonstrated that same-sex marriage deliberately deprives the child of a mother and a father and is therefore harmful. Katie Faust, being interviewed by Ryan Anderson, says that it's not fun being made a product for a same-sex family. She says she was a product for a same-sex family, and she said every child raised by 2 moms or 2 dads came into the household via one of 4 traumatic ways: through abandonment by a biological parent, divorce, or death, or by a biological parent who was also aided by donor conception. And then she says, the bonds with one's natural parents deserve to be protected. She said, do not fall prey to the false narratives that adults' feelings should trump children's rights. The onus must be on adults to conform to the needs of children and not the other way around. This idea of a surrogacy actually degrades what it means to be female. My conclusion, and I know I'm running long, so I'm going to just do this quickly. I'm going to quote two people who put it well. One is Jay Budiashevsky. The scandal of natural law is acute because of our suicidal proclivity of our time to deny the obvious. Human beings are capable of good reason and reason that matches reality and fosters human flourishing. And as Christians, we're called to speak the truth in love. Humans cannot survive well or long outside of the family structure, and we're not designed to do so. The Christian faith offers a different story of marital love, a lifelong relationship grounded in faithfulness that launches members on a joint adventure with public and private responsibilities. So again, there's so many things we could say, but I hope that this overview was at least somewhat informative.
Thank you very much, Nora. If you can just stop sharing your screen now, and then we can move to the second half of this evening's. Thank you very much, Nora, for that excellent lecture. Like I said, it is like drinking from a fire hydrant. There's a lot of information there, but unfortunately, as much information is out there in an age of information, it's still staggering to see how so many people have been deceived or deluded into some of these contemporary views of family, sexuality, and how masses of people are just succumbing to this new cultural shift in view of values and ethics and family and so forth. It is quite staggering, to say the least, in an age of information. I want to begin, Nora, in our Q&A session now with kind of working through your talk and maybe hitting on some questions that I think are important. I'm going to start off, first of all, with the beginning of your slide. You talked about this issue of a denial of reality. And many have written about this. Ryan Anderson's book, he addresses this, and I've seen this in the work of many others, and not just Christians, but secularists who are critiquing some of this stuff as well. Where did this denial of reality begin, and why, and how has it gripped everybody such that we're kind of in a state of the emperor's clothes off now, where common sense is just being kicked to the curb, and what's worse is you're not allowed to object to any of it. Where did this begin? Where did this denial of reality begin?
Well, Simon, I think back to just skepticism in general. Where did that come about, that we can't know certain things, right? Immanuel Kant, we can't know that there's a God, but we can act morally because it's just the right thing to do. Well, I think what's happened over the centuries, maybe, that in fact, Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, goes into the history of this, that basically we've gone through periods of time where we kind of just migrated to this idea that, we've got to be expressive individuals, that basically we can create our own reality. And of course, it's not livable. It's not something that actually works. We don't have that kind of control over the objective world. But I think it's a natural human rebellion against the way the world is designed. It's just man's desire to be his own God.
Yeah, and as I've kind of grappled with what I think is the fundamental idea driving all of this stuff, and it is this philosophical skepticism. I am, in my mind, convinced that this has come out of the halls of philosophy. This philosophical skepticism I think that it's tied to German idealism specifically. It's the subjectivism of it was come out of idealist philosophy, which, interestingly enough, comes out of Europe, in which you have your own perspective, and reality ought to conform to what you think. I think last week, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to Dr. Louise Mabille. She did a lecture on the Romantic movement, and you see a connection there in terms of this. Yeah, because I think what's happening as well is, alongside this rejection of reality, a second thing sweeps in rather quickly, and this is this emphasis on emotions and feelings. How much of that is a part of this this new cultural wave?
Oh, I believe it's just insidiously infiltrated everything. I mean, from you take a child to Disney and you go in to see, the show Frozen. I can basically be what I am, and you have to like it, whatever it is. And parents are told, that I've got to be me, and that if you don't go along with what your child says, they're going to commit suicide. So it's let me be me. You see these slogans everywhere. I'm just, you do you, it's just this total, like we're in a bubble of this false ideology that there is no objective reality, that I can make it up. And everywhere it's introduced in everything.
Yeah, and I think at this point of the from a young age as well. I mean, you quoted statistics there of young people who are having these issues with their gender and the levels of suicide. But here's where the emotional side is. That's one of the key arguments coming from people who are supporting this new movement, is to say, oh, the reason why all these kids are topping themselves is because you don't affirm them. Okay.
Right.
And of course, that's tremendously manipulative and tremendously abusive and coercive, because of course nobody wants to be responsible for causing young people to go and commit suicide.
Right.
But of course, I would object to that accusation, and saying that I don't think that there is necessarily a correlation between these suicide rates and the fact that I don't approve of that lifestyle. But most people can't navigate that. They just get bullied into submission with this kind of thing. Is that what's done in the US? Is this the kind of argument that's being made in the US?
Oh yes, I know mothers who are just so afraid they'll look back and regret that they didn't do everything they could. And this is, again, you saw the graphs I had of male and female. Everything they could do to help their child. This is how we are as mothers. But the objective reality is that this doesn't help their child. It is like, as Dr. Mayhew says, doing liposuction on a child who has anorexia. You're actually feeding the harm. And many of these children already are struggling. The ones who truly have dysphoria, gender dysphoria, not the ones who are just wanting the attention, which I think is the majority, wanting attention, or because their parents promoted it from birth. The parents loved being a part of this new idea. But I think what happens is that, you look at this and you go, you're not helping this child. And really, in the long run, this child probably has a lot of other problems going on that are not being addressed. And so we see that when they come back, there are many who've come back and gone and reversed this transgenderism, gone back and said, wait a minute, no, I'm not transgender. And they said basically that now they look back with much regret because it didn't do what was promised for them, and now they're stuck even worse. Yeah.
Because as you pointed out, some of the consequences of some of these conversions, when you start mutilating yourself and plowing your body with these powerful drugs, those medical events are irreversible. You start messing around with that, it's not like you can, reverse the whole process. It's a train wreck.
And they don't really even know the effects of these things down the road. They don't. All they can do is use them as experiments.
Yes, and of course, as you said, it's not. I think I forget who had the quote there. You're not actually turning the person into their gender. You're just. It's kind of like a manipulation of some exterior features in reality, but that doesn't change your genetic makeup in any way, shape, or form.
That's right. It's the costume. It's making a costume. That's all that can be done.
You mentioned something there, Nora, which I've also have seen more, and this is another thing that's I think is helpful for people to make distinctions between those who generally have gender dysphoria or might, for example, be intersex. We know that there are certain Klinefeld's, I think it's a Klinefeld's disease or something like that. There are some conditions, medical conditions we know of.
Right.
So one of the famous icons in this whole debate is a South African athlete, a woman by the name of Caster Semenya, who's often appealed to within the sports community. But we know that she has a particular condition.
That's right.
My concern is the masses that you refer to that are buying into this thing when they don't have gender dysphoria. What they are bought into is what I would call philosophical propaganda. Okay, it is the propaganda of the postmodern philosophers and the works of, I think, people like Judith Butler, for example, would do this. This is an epistemological idea that you've been convinced of. That is that truth is whatever you think it is. Okay,
that's right.
That's got nothing to do with gender dysphoria. You've bought into a bad philosophy. You've bought into a self-stultifying philosophy. Maybe you can talk about the distinctions between parents with kids who have definite gender dysphoria and where I think a lot of young people are, and they're buying into the philosophy of the age. Could you maybe share some? Yeah.
Well, I have a slide. Let me go to it. Okay. Let's see if I can get this up. I'm going to just go to this and see if it'll come up. Okay. Hold on. Let's see if I can get there. All right. Let's look at this. So for those who actually do have a what would be called basically a functional disorder, really, an order of sexual development that is not like 99.98% of the population. 99.98% of the population is male or female. This is Dr. Leonard Sachs. And what he is making a point of in this article, and you can get this, just go online, How Common is Intersex? He's making the point that certain people like Anne Fausto Sterling, who wrote Sexting the Body, Gender Politics and the Construction of Sexuality, she was trying to make the point that any problem with hormonal deviations, or that those are the same thing as intersex, and so here we have three things going on. We have a philosophical idea that I'm a male or a female, opposite of what I am. Or I actually do have some sort of hormonal imbalance that can be treated because it's basically a physical problem with my body. Or I actually have something down here, which I'm pointing to, which is the things you were talking about, an actual chromosomal problem. Okay, a real or a phenotype problem where what looks physically to be true is actually an underdeveloped sex organ. Okay, but this is very rare, as we said. 0.008% of the population, or the mosaic 0.0012%. So what we need to do is really not allow the media, the culture, people who state that this is the same thing, that intersex is the same thing. We need to really point out that when they added that to the LGBT plus wording, that doesn't fit there, because these people actually do have a problem with sexual development within their body. And so once we separate that, then we say, let's call that out and say, now what about psychiatric disease? What about kids who have autism, who are easy targets because they don't fit in maybe well in the culture? So they're targeted, Let's target people who already have emotional problems. So what I would say with parents is, our connection with our children, as all the slides I was showing, we don't realize how important it is for our children to be bonded with their own parents and know their parents have their best interests at heart, and that we actually tell our children the truth, what matches reality. I mean, my 6-year-old, my 5-year-old grandsons know that a male dog and a female dog have puppies. They know that. And they know that they are male and female. But when adults actually are, I think, committing child abuse when they promote to a child that they're the opposite sex.
Yeah, and I think that would be correct. And interestingly, it's the kid doesn't know any better, but it's the parents who've brought into this philosophical view, this warped epistemological view, which says that reality must conform to my thoughts, and then they kind of thrust that upon the young kids and persuade them and convince them that this is what they are, or this is what they can be. I do think that there's some kind of abuse there in that way. Of course, those of us who are trying to affirm reality are the people who are called abusive and bigots and haters and all the rest of it. That's how crazy the world in the West has become. We've literally lost our minds on the things that are most obvious. I like what Douglas Murray says in his book, The Madness of Crowders. We've been forced to believe things that are literally unbelievable.
That's right.
And
that's right.
All stand and applaud and approve of this madness. It's crazy. I wanted to just get you to address this issue of, because we've spoken about a comprehensive sexuality education because it's a program that's been run out in America, but here in South Africa, we also have seen attempts made to run the program out here in our own country. Now, there was a bit of a fight to try and get the curriculum, and the public wanted it. And when it did came up, there was a bit of a pushback. The latest on that is that they're trying to run it out, although it's not, the schools can make a decision. Basically, it's there for schools to be used in one of our states called the Western Cape, which is there's 9 states or provinces in South Africa. So they're still trialing this little experiment. But the document was drafted by UNESCO and funded by USA. And I remember reading through it now, and there was that statement: sex is a social construct, okay? Yeah. Which, of course, I know that that's a highly, it's a great indicator of the evidence of the social justice scholars and their influence in that. Because I don't know, I would argue that most South African teachers don't even know what a social construct is. Now they've got to go and tell a bunch of kids in primary school that sex isn't what you're not to have. Sex doesn't have to do with anatomy and physiology. That's really irrelevant. Sex is just a social construct. And that's in our documents here in South Africa. But what do you say to those who are arguing that sex is a social construct? And this, I mean, Prager talks about it, the fact that so many in the medical world have capitulated to basically the ideas of Judith Butler. What do you say to that? I mean, how can, because you've presented a lot of medical material, but now a lot of the medical doctors and associations are kind of ignoring all of this massive work that's been done and the distinctions between men and women. Right. What do you say about that? How can you appeal to reality when the medical world has also said, well, we're going to go on board with this now. What do you say of that? About that?
I say that, and if you can see some of the parents in the United States now standing up at their school boards and facing people who are pushing these agendas, basically they have to be called out. There's really no way for us to do much about it at this present time with the people who are basically in charge, because they don't give us a platform. In other words, if you say anything that goes against what the politically correct desire right now, you get canceled. And if they can cancel a president of the United States, they will cancel everybody and anybody who promotes the wrong thing, that doesn't support this idea. So what we are saying in the United States, and I'm seeing coming out all over the place, whether it's Heritage Foundation, the American Family Association, all these different groups are telling parents, we have to go to our school boards and speak up. We have to say and face them and say, do you understand that if you are going to teach a child that a male and a female is a social construct, then how are you going to teach them biology? What we do with our grandchildren is pull out a textbook and say, look, here's the male, here's the female. This is how it works, and it doesn't work any other way. Now, feminists, especially, I'm not dissing all feminists, but I am the most recent feminist, the what I would call the third wave. They're saying, of course, that reproduction, it just is mind-boggling, that we really need queer social reproduction, that basically women, should not be the ones who are saddled with pregnancy and childbearing, that, raising children and having children is an inequality. Well, again, we have to spell it out. I find myself I'm going to spell this out like I would to a 6-year-old. This is the way it works. Have you forgotten? This is how it works. Children don't raise themselves. Puppies can be weaned at 6 weeks, but children cannot. We have to teach reality. We have to live within reality. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's interesting because that sets up the obvious, the massive contradictions which we are now being forced to believe by this woke movement and the social justice movement, particularly on this issue of gender. Because if you do have a class in anatomy and physiology or biology, you literally have to pretend like you didn't have that class when you go into your other class on sexuality and family, if they're teaching that in there, and pretend like you didn't, that doesn't matter.
That's right.
It matters. It matters for the rest of all of the other species in the world that we study, that there's a distinction between male and females, and we can appreciate all of that. But when it comes to human being, it's all just a social construct, because Judith Butler said so. What's staggering to me is how it is that here in Africa, how it is that there's a large push to decolonize Africa from the influence of all of these non-African ideas. And yet here in South Africa, we are hastily swallowing the ideas of many American ethicists and people like Judith Butler and other social justice warriors. When these ideas really, here in Africa, people have a traditional, and I would argue common sense view of these things. African people know the difference between a male and female. They don't think that these things are normative. They understand that there's an issue going on there. And yet we've been told that that's backward and oppressive, most part, by white people who are telling us that as well. And of course, the greatest irony of this, because I know with yourself and Duke, you had a taste of the 60s. You can find this going back to the ideas of people like Herbert Marcuse, and he's pushing for an androgynous society.
That's right.
And then his influence on people like Angela Davis in the United States and many others who were influenced by this thinking. Maybe you can unpack because I know you studied feminism, what could you say about the 60s and how that kind of is, because really it was a breeding ground for this. You've got people like Alfred Kinsey, you've got Herbert
Yes.
Marcuse with his philosophy, then following them, you've got people like Schuller Matthias. How has that kind of contributed to this issue?
Well, Betty Friedan, it's funny because she, I don't know, she was sort of for me, in the 60s, I went to college right after the 60s, in the early 70s, mid 70s, and I had to take a class called the New Role of Women, and it was at a Baptist university, a Baptist school, and Betty Friedan spoke. She spoke on her book, The Feminist Mystique. She came and spoke on that. And I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't, I was 18, 19 years old, hadn't really thought about it that much, but something didn't click there with me. And so, yes, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of stuff going on campuses and everywhere about the sexual revolution. And of course, the feminists of that time. But how that has affected us is that, these women were basically wanting us young freshmen who came in to colleges to really reject the idea of marriage, being a wife, being a mother, because it's subjugation. To be a wife and a mother is subjugation. And so we're basically the second sex, or the lesser important sex. And so to free ourselves from that, we all must have a career outside of the home. And because otherwise we're hurting the sexual revolution for women, right? So these feminists push the idea that, women basically need to be childless, or at least we need to have total, complete reproductive justice, meaning abortion on demand. And the idea that being at home and raising your children and teaching them the values of your family and of your faith, that's to be laughed at and frowned upon. And of course, that's much more common today than it was then, but it was being pushed then too.
So you would say then that there is, if you follow the history of ideas, there is a connection between this contemporary madness and the history of feminist movement as well, in terms of a warped view. Yeah, that would be an interesting topic to unpack as well. I've got a few questions here, Nora, that have come through from us. And Nora, at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned a female soul. How do you understand gender as it relates to souls, and why?
Okay, when I said female soul, what I'm talking about is a soul body. So when I was using that definition of holomorphism, I was saying that the female soul is not separate from the body. The body soul is a union and cannot be separated. So there is no such thing as a separate female soul. And I will tell you, the only situation where there is a separate female soul is at death, when the body and soul separate, right? And the body goes to the ground, and we as Christians believe the soul immediately is in the presence of Christ until we receive our redeemed body. Yes, but the soul of a human on the earth is always unified, soul body.
Okay. Nora, it seems like women are being erased. How has the feminist movement not been up in arms about this? Or are those who object being pushed aside? Well,
absolutely.
It's not just that.
Go ahead.
Maybe you could comment on the erasure. Yeah. What is that? What do you understand by this erasure of women?
Erasing of women, basically, which we see now, of course, is affecting our sports teams and everything else. But what the first feminists did to give us the right to vote, the right to own property, those kinds of things that really are a good advancement for women, has now basically ended up in the erasure of femininity, as if it is inferior. In other words, to be a woman today is to erase anything about her that's feminine and she might dress like a woman, but she's to act like a man, whatever that means.
Yes.
So it is
okay.
the erasure.
But would you argue it's not just the erasure of women, it's also become the erasure of men?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So this is the androgynous society that Marcuse was dreaming up in the 60s, that basically you have society where there is no gender. There's just people, and there's no distinction between men and women. Because I've seen the same with men. Men are now the worst things on the planet, and you have all this toxic masculinity, and so women are becoming like blokes, and blokes are disappearing and running away because they're all kind of falling over. They're passive. They don't want to offend anybody. They are becoming weak. They've been told they're worthless. They've been told that the cause of all the world's problems. And so the men are being erased. What is a man to a lot of modern people? Well, they don't know. They don't know what a man is anymore. And I would say that this is an erasure of both masculinity and femininity.
That's right.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would say that it's what is a man, what is a woman, what is a mother, what is a father, what is a girl, what is a boy, what is marriage. All of those things are losing any definition, but that's on purpose, because it's to erase those things and to get rid of any core value that would raise itself above the ideology of basically sexual freedom, complete freedom to do and be anything you choose to do and be, right?
And,
so yeah.
Well, I think this, and I've only kind of been studying this in the last year and a half or so, but once you see that, then you can see why so many of these ideologues are hell-bent on destroying the nuclear family, because it's within the nuclear family where you affirm these binaries of male and female, and dads teach their sons what it means to be a man, and mom teaches their daughter what it means to be a woman. And so they need to atomize and abolish the family, because that's the institution that's constantly working against this androgynous society and this androgynous utopia that they're dreaming up. I mean, I couldn't believe that. That sounds crazy when I first heard it. But then when you go and you read and listen to people like Sophie Lewis and Shulamith Firestone and Herbert Marcuse, and then of course along comes BLM, and you're going, why on earth is BLM anti-family? And then you realize, no, they're just part of this group of ideas. And so they're just being consistent, even though the BLM leaders, I don't think, are the ideas people in this movement. They're just being consistent with the desires of this movement, which is to atomize the family, because within the family structures, we reinforce some of these key concepts. And of course, few of the concepts that a human being are more fundamental to a human being is coming to terms with what you are,
That's right. And that foundation, again, you can't do away with male and female reproduction, or you have no people. And that's where the first society came from. And of course, this would be a complete anti-Christian view of the world, to get rid of the family, anti to church, anti to fellowship, and really anti to your nation. Because what happens is anything that doesn't go along with this ideology is oppressive, considered oppressive, no matter what it is. If it's a institution that upholds certain values that disagrees with this ideology, then it has to be stamped out.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I still can't believe that we are where we are in this time now with these issues. If you had told me this, when we were at SES together years ago, I couldn't believe that we would be this far down the road on these issues, that we were actually arguing over these kinds of things, these self-evident things. But we need to speak up and stand up. Just one more question here, and then we will need to wrap up, Nora. What do you make of instances where testosterone is incorrectly or insufficiently released in the womb, resulting in a more feminine man. So,
well, I don't know. So I've never heard of that, where testosterone is released. Is this, do you think the person who's asking this question is saying this is a natural thing that happens? Or is this?
Yeah, so if a fetus doesn't get the natural amount of testosterone,
Okay.
and so then that child isn't going to have the same levels of masculine aspects that you notified in it. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I would say, like, this flood of testosterone that you were talking about, well, that I was talking about, I'm assuming that's what you mean, rather than someone somehow that just happens naturally. Yes, sometimes those things do happen naturally, absolutely. But that does not change the XY chromosome. That does not change that. Now, granted, there may be some dysfunction because of that. And yes, doctors can treat those things. And like any area where we need help, and all of us do in various areas, doctors are equipped to help children like that. But that does not qualify, again, as a third sex or not a man, because any XY is a man with a Y and an X. And so, yes, there may be some problems with them not being bathed in the correct amount of testosterone. I'm sure that it varies among all males, how much testosterone. So it's an idea of, do we turn our culture over to an ideology because there are true problems with humanity? Yes. Well, no, actually, we protect our culture by helping children who need help and adults who need help. Absolutely. So that's what I would say to that. I would say, if humans can intervene in a way that actually promotes and helps people flourish, then that's what we want to do. We don't want to do the opposite.
Yeah. The final question then, Nora, for us this evening, and one which would apply to a large part of the African community. Could the objection be made that your view of marriage and sex is a severely Christianized one? Historically speaking, polygamy has been prominent, and even homosexuality has been tolerated. So what do you do with the argument for polygamous marriages?
Okay, well, yes, I would say that it is true that Christianity gives me a way of looking at marriage that may not be something everyone accepts. However, everyone does know that procreation is between one man and one woman. And if you are looking at the Bible, for instance, and you see polygamy in the Old Testament, it is never presented as a good way to live. And there's always bad problems. And we know from the very beginning that was not promoted. So polygamy, as we have seen it, even among groups that did it in the United States, it has never been promoted as a healthy way to live. Now, why did it happen in the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament tells the good, the bad, and the ugly. It tells the truth. It tells how people live. When men disregard other men and have a tribe of women for wives, it never works out well, not for the women and not for their children. So, and we see that. Now, in terms of how I would see it in terms of homosexuality, it's probably only a first world country, maybe a second world country that even understand, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I mean that would even look to our government to okay something like homosexuality. Because we know that to produce children, you have to have a male and a female. And so the Americans who demand reproductive justice and are male and are not, our two females or two males, well, that would only happen in a country where we would promote maybe governmental help to help people have children who physically can't have children. Okay. And of course, there are plenty of children who need adopting, and we know that, and that happens in heterosexual couples. But what we want to do by natural law is promote what is the most healthy for human flourishing. So that doesn't have anything really to do with Christianity, except that Christianity is congruent with reality. Christianity matches what works, okay? But aside from that, natural law actually works for human beings. One man, one woman is what works when you are producing other human beings. There really is no other system that works unless you want to make a baby in a test tube and then try to find a surrogate to carry them. Again, that's a first world problem, not a third world problem. And really becoming a problem even in our government, where we want the taxpayer to foot the bill for reassignment surgery and surrogacy and all of those kinds of things.
Yes, and I would argue also on the issue of polygamy, and because we don't have time to unpack this now, is that the problem with it is that you cannot have true unity in a polygamous marriage. Both one, literally, you cannot have true unity. You can't have a bodily unity. But I think that absence of unity between one man and one woman, which is the model that the Bible affirms, and as you said, the Bible does talk about homosexuality. It does talk about polygamy, but it doesn't affirm either one of those. In fact, it points out that there's problems with those, and we see that in the scripture. So the Bible talks about, as you said, the true, the good, and both the good and the bad. But I think that the issue with polygamy there is that you can't have true unity between the couple. And but we've run out of time now, Nora. But on behalf of Ratio Christi South Africa, thank you so much for your lecture and this Q&A session. And we really appreciate that. And maybe I can just give you a minute or two just to close for us. But thank you very much. Maybe you can just close for us and share your final thoughts on these issues.
I would just say for any man or woman out there listening that, use your voice to speak truth. And I know that that's going to be unpopular. And boy, I don't like that. But you know what? That's pretty much what we're called to do, to speak truth to people in love. And if we really love or will the good of someone, then we're going to speak truth to them so that they can have a good life, that they truly are given responsibility to actually steward what they've been given and do it in the best possible way. And I believe Christianity does give us the answer for that.
All right. Well, Nora, thank you very much. God bless you. And to take care of Duke as well. And hopefully in the future, you can come and visit us here in South Africa, and we can have you do some teaching and training over here for us in the churches in South Africa.
Well, thank you, Simon. I hope y'all have a good week, a good summer coming up.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.